Hey folks, welcome back. As you can see today I'm doing something a little different. I've decided to do a discussion on what makes a strength card. The caveat obviously being, for me, strength is one of my favourite cards in the tarot. Honestly, I have always felt a personal connection to it from a young age. I'm sure that probably at the time it just had something to do with it having a lion on it or whatever it was. Interestingly enough, it's also my life path card, if you're familiar with working those out. While I'm not entirely sure what I think or feel about that system, I just find the connection a fun additional layer. It was interesting to find out and know. And additionally, I am a Leo sun and Leo rising. And for those who are unfamiliar with astrological associations, the strength card is one of the Leo cards, so predominantly the main one. And then there are Leo associations with the sun card because the sun is Leo's ruler. And then we also have the Knight of Wands, I believe it is, and then the 5, 6 and 7 of Wands, which I think is like your Mars, Jupiter, and I can't remember the other one. But yes, so this is the Leo card. Before I dive in further, I did just want to give a quick shout out. This video was actually kind of sparked or inspired by Sarah from Sunset Bow Tarot, who recently created a video in response to the hashtag #ShowUsYourDecks. In her video, as she was going through the prompts, she shared why she liked the depiction of a deer in the strength card from one of her decks. I really encourage you to check out her video, which is linked in the description below. I have really been wanting to create some more chatty tarot resources here, but it's been quite challenging to balance content with my Patreon and think up extra ideas to come here with. So I thought that mini discussions like this might be enjoyable, especially after Sarah just sparked something in me. I wanted to roll with it. I also already enjoy comparing depictions and discussing the visual nuances and themes throughout decks, and I have an ongoing series on Patreon called Animals in Tarot that focuses on a selected animal in each video, and we look at all of the different decks and where animal shows up in and all of that good stuff. So this is, I suppose, in part a smaller iteration of that with the strength card, and perhaps I'll do some more in the future. Here we've got the strength card from the Lioness Oracle Tarot. It's probably one of my all-time favourites. I do actually have another 7 cards picked, so in total we have 8 because I thought that would be fun. Strength isn't always 8 in the tarot, however. Sometimes it's 8, sometimes it's 11. It depends on the system that the person's chose to express. The association numerically doesn't really make much of a difference to me, in honesty. However, I mentally think of it as the number 8. So do with that what you will. I decided to begin with things that I don't love about it and an overview of how I perceive strength as an archetype, and moving into cards that reflect this, and perhaps a few more card discussions included at the end. This will not be an exhaustive exploration though, and I really want to clarify that, so I'm sure I'm going to miss some stuff. But yeah, mostly as I talk about it, I wanted to share some of my favourite depictions of strength, what I see in them and why they resonate with me. So I'm going to leave this one here for a second, but I'm not referencing this one quickly because I just thought I would start with a few strength card turn-offs. I don't know, no-nos. That feels a bit strong, but some representations truly miss the mark for me. I probably should have put the Rider-Waite-Smith one out. I'm sure I can plonk it in here. It's not this one that I'm referencing. However, I've seen a lot of sort of expansions on the whole person and, you know, large wild animal or person and beast, however you want to form that. And in some of those, the physical expression of strength can feel really aggressive and overbearing to me. And I do feel like there is the potential for this to be viewed as like a reversed or shadow aspect of the card's many expressions. There's just something missing from it, and when they get really overly physical in that way, sometimes I feel like it doesn't leave space for the versatility as well. So I understand and appreciate the idea of taming a wild animal, especially as a metaphor for what exists within ourselves. However, I noticed the tendency for some to overly express that physical strength, and I can find myself kind of longing for depictions that feel like they speak to some of the other facets the strength card can symbolise. So this one is a really beautiful example. Here we have a puma, mountain lion, cougar, dependent on where you live in the world. Same animal, different names. And then we have them in and around a beautiful rose bush. And the rose bush theme comes up in 2 of my cards, actually. So perhaps I should get the other one out. So here I also have the Wild Unknown Tarot, and I love that it keeps the lion in it. And then we actually have the rose through the lion's mouth. We also have the more traditional inclusion of the infinity symbol. And as you can see, this one's actually the 11 in the Wild Unknown Tarot. And for me, when I think about the rose as a representation of things like beauty and love and compassion, and then we move into the thorns in terms of boundaries and protection. And I think that those associations, those metaphors, they kind of travel, even if you're not someone who perhaps uses them in the craft. Most people kind of have those sort of associations. I feel like obviously you can get into the colour of roses as well, but that's a side tangent. I feel like what the rose and the thorn helps us do with these beautiful, glorious wild cats is it helps us remember our and their like multiplicity, all of the facets, the wonderful contrast and contradictions, or at least what we believe to be like the layers, and it helps us see these in the animal too. Because for me, strength, it represents the compassion of the heart, you know, a willingness to be vulnerable, and the positive risks that can come from being open rather than closed off emotionally, empathetically, mentally. Obviously, there are more overt physical expressions of strength too, which is why the wild animal is such a key facet here as well. And having strength for me has often meant fostering courage and faith during just incredibly challenging moments, even when it doesn't come naturally. I also wanted to think about some of the other ways that it's expressed that are a bit more perhaps implicit. So as someone who is chronically in pain and disabled, I think about the subtle forms of strength that aren't always visible. And perhaps I'll bring another card in now because I wanted to keep giving you things to look at, but some of these cards are probably going to be relevant more than once in the conversation, but we're just going to roll with it. It was kind of a loose layout idea that I had. I feel like this is a really good continuation of where I wanted to go. This is the Witch Sister Tarot, which honestly, I also did think of the Tarot of Hidden Realms, which is also a Julia Jeffries deck creation, but I decided to go for this one because this is again one of my favourites. I just love the Scottish Wildcat. I really love the way that they're showing up here together. And what it makes me think about is like the idea of coexisting harmoniously, a wild animal and a human without the need for physical dominance, which, as I say, sometimes it feels like the strength card goes a little bit too much in that way for me. And I appreciate that the idea of coexisting harmoniously with wild animals, it's a bit Disney, let's face it. So apologies for such a saccharine example, but I feel like people can appreciate that it does work as a metaphor. Like, I feel like it's something that folks still recognise based on familiar visuals of this card. You know, this kind of strength is not often visually apparent which is why the engagement and the way they're showing up here is different, but it still can be a consistent part of our lives. And then on the flip side of that, I also recognise that there are pitfalls to consider, like the pressure to wear a mask or the glamorisation of someone who is kind of perceived as a poster child for managing illness well, in the instance that I'm giving you. You know, look at all of the things that they can still do, and oh, you're so strong, how do you do it? And those kind of discussions that end up being quite topical for those of us who have physical conditions, have pain, have invisible conditions, etc. Because really the simple fact is we don't have any choice. And while sometimes that sort of strength being recognised can be a powerful thing, it depends how it's recognised, you know, that glamorisation of it. And so in this instance, I don't feel like this is a glamorisation too much either. It's not as Disney as some of the other ones. It's like the coexistence of these two what we're seeing, the witch feels really feral still to me. Seeing them in that state, and almost like the idea of working together and bringing something different to it, but in that like dualistic way, like complementary, which makes me think of the infinity and the idea of all of the things on the spectrum feeding into each other, and the cycles and spirals that can show up just in life and then obviously get filtered down into our archetypes and our expressions of the world and our experiences. I've swapped it out for the next card, but again, trying to keep it interesting for you. This is the Mystical Cats Tarot. This is the most peaceful expression ever, because as we know, we have predator and prey here, and we have a very, very different experience going on than what we would expect. In some instances, a little bit Disney again, but I'm not mad at it, because I feel like sometimes to express a facet of a card requires a little bit of fantasy to speak to reality. I don't know if that travels for anyone else, but because we're often seeing a scene or a symbol or a physical display of something, as I say, that sort of person taming beast, it can speak to some facets, but it doesn't speak to all of them. And so I really appreciate the variations and the creative reimagining of this archetype. And it brings me into just the many layers of that concept, because I see mental strength as the ability to confront challenges, even daily, when we might know that sometimes respite is scarce, yet showing up still without resorting to things like, I don't know, a permanent short temper. There's really something else you've got to channel in those instances, and I'm not saying it's wrong either to have a short temper sometimes. I'm just trying to use myself as one microscopic example, but I feel like it involves having compassion for others, and even, I know for me, like avoiding comparisons of pain or challenges. So that sort of peacefulness that I see here, even though they're animals, I can kind of channel that. And then I interpret strength of the heart as finding ways to still show up, you know, loving others, perhaps after experiencing deep emotional wounds. Maybe not to those who are part of the wounding, it very much depends, but I want to make it clear that that's not like a toxic positivity thing that we're trying to run here. But really a way to return to an open heart with, you know, the quote-unquote right people, as right as anything can be. There's something about this card and the peacefulness of it, actually, even though it's not people. It reminds me of how humbled I am as well to witness expressions of strength in my clients when they attend their therapy or when they attend their tarot readings, and they are willing to explore their wounds, speak to and seek out their desires, embrace a deeper, healthier relationship with embodiment, the world, their relationships, and even explore perceived flaws and failings whilst really being present in their humanity. Like really rooted into that in a very compassionate way. This card speaks to me of compassion just so much. Now moving into the Brady Tarot and a little bit more ferocity with this very almost confronting mother bear vibe that we've got going on here. We've actually got the snake around the feet in the infinity again, and we've got some owls flying overhead. I think that one of the things that I also want to speak to, for me, it's one of the archetypes we're invited to embody and express our boundaries. Like a space of fostering resilience and also a journey towards understanding and healing our ego. Because our sense of self is crucial, and while a healthy ego is attainable and we can totally tend to that, the notion of completely removing our ego is not. It's really not. I will not jump onto that TED talk right now, but seriously, whilst mini microcosmic ego deaths as a concept in psychology theory can be a thing, killing off the ego cannot. That's kind of one of my irks. But I do think that this is a great card for the ego, like a great expression of it. And whilst many of these themes I'm talking about, you know, boundaries, resilience, they can appear in various cards and also can be reflected based on like the questions we ask, how we frame them. I do feel that they naturally exist already within the Strength card, and as it being like a major archetype as well, I feel like it represents like a deep, wild calling that reverberates within our hearts and our spirits. And so pulling in some of the imagery from this, I do think that there's a layer of learning to approach situations differently and certainly embracing them outside of familiar patterns that might not be helpful to us, and from, you know, taking up new things that require a certain strength of self again. But I don't want to ignore the ferocity, and I believe that ferocity for oneself and others, along with like wild, raw love and just a deep desire to protect, including a sense of righteous rage, can also, and is definitely for me also, a part of this card's meaning. So when it comes to like the idea of softening on the other end of the spectrum, this means not softening ourselves simply to conform to societal expectations regarding anything, gender, age, class, race, just anything. I think that there is a significant reclamation possible here, whether that is a reclamation of ferocity, of rage, whether it's of softness, of vulnerability, and it can be messy. That is some of what's going on here as well. Like I said, it feels very raw without using that word like a zillion times. I don't see the Strength card as like a neatly polished expression or idea, but rather as like a feeling, a sensation, an intuition, a taste of something that needs to be pursued, a desire or just a real need to honour this. And with that in mind, moving into the Folkloric Forest Tarot with just what is the ultimate witchy folk depiction as they ride off with their goat. Again, the connection between the human and the animal and those kind of like primal calls. Also, I feel like when we speak about strength, there's the idea of facing our fears, but it's not to be mistaken with a lack of fear. Like for me, that is still a natural instinct. It still can be a necessary one, providing, you know, it's not just overstimulated all the time and our nervous system's like, you know, firing off. But the embodiment of strength in all of its iterations, it does have that like to face fear, to, like I said, pull on that idea of trying to foster courage, trying to act with it when it's not naturally accessible to us, when we feel like it's not there, and still showing up, and that being an expression of that even when it's not perfect. And I feel like also this makes me think of meaningful confrontation. I mean, we don't know what they're riding to, but it gives me that idea of like embracing our power, And meaningful confrontation, meaning not just confrontation for the sake of it, not confrontation just to win or to, you know, confrontation with meaning, whether that's compassionate or in resistance to something. Really, for me, the idea of like taming the beast, and I'm sure I've said it before, it's poetic, it's fantastic. I love that as a statement, but I also recognise that a part of it feels like missing the point, because I feel like it's more to be in relation with and consciously engaging with how we channel our beast, as it were. You know, healthy choices and retaining an awareness, retaining responsibility and autonomy. Strength can be as quiet and subtle as it can be loud and really kind of explicit. And at its best, I suppose it's really unwavering, but because it's messy, it might not always feel unwavering. It might not always look like that. I think that there is fragile, vulnerable expressions of strength where we are showing up and just doing our best and riding forth with the best intention and the best embodiment that we can, you know? We have another one of my favourites. I mean, I love all of these expressions. I'm sure there's more I've missed as well, but, you know, 8 was enough. Also, it was fun because, you know, 8. I really love this. This is from the Antique Anatomy Tarot, the ephemera edition, etc. This is actually a femur bone, as I understand it. And when looking into the femur bone, it's considered, at least to my knowledge, the strongest bone in the body. But what I really loved about what we could take from it is it supports how we stand. That's a part of what it functions as. It helps our balance and our movement. Usually in discussions of the body, they're quite confronting cards for me usually, because my body does not do what I would like it to do and all of the things. But there's something about, I suggest, the breaking down of anatomy and this deck in particular that doesn't feel confronting in an unhelpful way. And it makes a lot of sense to me. Like, this just feels very fitting for this, if that makes sense. And I will add, whilst I am going off-brand for what we're seeing here, because this is a bone, when thinking of body metaphors, I feel like we can think of strength as a muscle as well, you know, something that we need to utilise to keep in shape. So we feed into it, we engage with it, we look after it, we get up and dust ourselves off and try again, you know. And in that sense, that brings in the idea of patience, which I feel like is another facet, another expression of strength. And also going back to the femur bone, like embracing our power, because there is power to be had here as well. And I feel like because it's such a mundane thing, you know, it's not something to be scoffed at, but it's everyday, you know, a bone. For many of us might not think about it very much at all otherwise. It makes me think of the many microcosmic expressions of strength that we can experience throughout a day, because although the major archetypes are considered major, it's in the name, I feel like sometimes when they show up, if we're not seeing something grand go on, there's just kind of like a misunderstanding or a conflation of what some of the cards might mean. Just like when the Tower shows up and the crumbling experience perhaps is not as huge as some of the others, but it's not to make them lesser than. And also the acknowledgement of how often we might embody this and experience it throughout a day, you know, it's kind of a big deal. And the final card that I chose was from the 𝗕𝗿 Tarot, and this is the Tree. And I love the Tree for strength. And as someone who has loved the Tree in other cards like the Emperor and the Empress, I clearly have a little bit of a lean towards trees, but it does make sense to me in this one as well. I think about what trees withstand, how when parts of them are cut, how they regrow. And it's not the same, it's different, but it's still growth, it's still development, it still continues, the cycle still returns. And I think about the aspect of flexibility, okay, perhaps not in the tree trunk per se, but there is a certain level of flexibility that in some trees is the thing that makes them withstand the longest, better than other things. If you think about how they get smashed about by the wind sometimes, and yet they remain this presence, and not an overbearing presence. I mean, we could get into the discussion of the root system and stuff, but I'll be here forever. I just love diving into those things, but they remain home. They remain safety for animals. They can be shelter, and that flexibility that they have, even though it's not the first thing perhaps we might think of, is definitely one of the superpowers. I know that I foster strength when I am more flexible and less rigid. And again, there's a lot of nuances and specifics that can come into that. It's not about being a pushover either. I think that's very clear in this card. It's definitely about being in space and owning it and being courageous with it. I do love this for the more quiet, subtle representation of strength, and yet they're so very recognizable, visible. It's not, you know, a tree this grand anyway has been around for a long time. So many lessons, so many chances to embody strength. Also, I feel like as a closing message, so that I don't make this too long, one of the things for me for strength is the meeting of what humans want to deem contradictions to each other, but they're all part and parcel. So like grace and ferocity, compassion and resistance, things that sometimes we decide you can't have one with the other. You know, we can't be our wild expressions and true expressions of ourselves whilst being thoughtful of others, whilst being compassionate to others, whilst being loving, whilst being part of the community. And it's just not the case for me. And so I feel like strength challenges that as well. It comes here to shake that up. And this tree, you know, as the shake up happens, think about all the wind blowing through the tree again. It reminds us that we can endure, we can move through, we can adapt and be with and grow with the process of those reclamations, of those expressions, of those confrontations. So there we have it. As I say, that is definitely not an exhaustive discussion of strength. There are so many ways that we can go with it, but I just wanted to speak a little bit about what makes strength for me, what I enjoy about the strength card, what I feel that it is some of its key expressions, and just a little bit of how I feel like they show up in some of these visuals and why I love these visuals so much. I will add that for me, when I'm working with strength and the idea of ferocity, with compassion, with an open heart, with resilience, with all of the things that I've discussed fostering, I work a lot with Freya, and the Lioness Oracle Tarot is actually one I've ended up associating with her, dedicating to her. And so this is very much a her deck for me, but also a her topic. And one of the ways that I guess I think about how I'm going to further embody and further express it. As you can see, not a lot of people in these, but I'm not a very people-y deck person. So I'm sure that that's not going to surprise anyone, but hey, we got a couple of people in there. What can I say? I like my cats, but also I love seeing different animals in it, which is something else that Sarah spoke to, and I really don't want to share what she said because I think that you need to go and listen to what she said about that card. So yeah, I hope that you've enjoyed this and it's been a fun strength discussion. Let me know your favourite strength card. Let me know what you thought of this kind of video. Like, do you want more of these? Is it just not your thing? I love speaking about tarot, and I really like the idea of finding a way to just bring a couple little more resources this way. Obviously, if you want my big, extensive, deep dives, intimate practice, all of that good stuff, then, you know, I'm over on Patreon. But yeah, what do you think about this as perhaps a little YouTube series? Let me know. Otherwise, take care, and I will see you all again soon. Bye.